This is TWiT. Let's do some brown liquor.
First of the year. So I figured I'd pull my Christmas whiskey. This is the bottle that I got for Christmas. You'll notice it's empty because it's not Christmas anymore.
A few days after Christmas.
Yeah, actually, it's not true. I moved it into the decanter. So
That's pretty. Why?
I like my.
There's just aesthetics, right? There's no.
It does nothing. Yeah.
Does nothing. Okay.
I mean, remember the era of the decanter comes from a time when you didn't buy whiskey in bottles, you bought it in barrels, or if you didn't want to buy a barrel, you took your decanter down to the shop. Or let's be clear, your servant took the decanter down.
You didn't want your whiskey to be chunky style.
Yeah, and have it filled from the barrel, and then you come back with your decanters. And so I got a nice decanter and glass set.
How long can you keep whiskey in that decanter? Does it degrade?
I mean, I wouldn't know. It doesn't last that long. No,
Foolish person asked that question.
That is theoretical at this point.
There's a discussion about oxidation in whiskey.
Because wine, it's a big problem. It oxidizes fast, and it's terrible.
It does oxidize fast, but because it's much lower alcohol,
right,
and it has far less stable compounds, resveratrols and so forth, just not the same stability. We're talking about a higher alcohol level, largely, this is stuff you use as a preservative, for crying out loud. And it's largely been filtered and so forth to be stable for a long time. That being said, keeping it for years is unwise because it does oxidize. We talk about flavors being muted. So I have done the trial of, hey, here's a Bowmore 25 that I got 2 years ago. It's been sitting at half a bottle for a year. I bought a new Bowmore 25, granted a different malting, it had to be, and tried them side by side. And the newer bottle is brighter, like the flavors are more intense. The one that's been sitting for a while is down. So how long do you keep a bottle of whiskey? Less than a year. And my real point has always been, if you're down to below a half a bottle,
drink it.
Sit down with a friend and finish it.
Just drink it.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Preferably not alone, because that leads to bad behavior.
It's like the Nike phrase,
just drink it. Yeah.
Just drink it. Your liver's a little off. Anyway, I never talked about Elijah Craig before. And so I thought, and this is Small Batches was the original Elijah Craig edition. And it says right on the bottle here, Elijah Craig, father of bourbon.
Wow. Yeah. That's a big statement for such a little bottle.
Also, are you going to let that go unchallenged?
Why? Certainly not.
Oh, interesting.
So today's conversation is about, what is that? Now, to be clear, Elijah Craig is a real person, or was a real person. He was born in 1738 in Virginia.
He's a real old person.
Yeah. This is, pre-revolution, that kind of thing. And he moved to Kentucky County, Virginia in 1782. Kentucky County, Virginia doesn't exist anymore. You now call it Kentucky.
Okay, right. It's Kentucky.
Right?
Okay. Oh, I got you.
Yeah. As the states started to appear and Kentucky becomes a state in 1792, what was Kentucky County, Virginia now becomes Kentucky. And he was a Baptist minister and died in 1808. There are many references to him. The town that he moved to was originally called Lebanon. It got renamed to Georgetown. He was one of the people instrumental, literally named for George Washington. And there are strong claims that some of the first bourbon whiskeys ever made in 1789 were done in Georgetown. And so, Craig was definitely there. He just wasn't in the whiskey business at the time. He was in the clothing business. So he owned a fulling mill. You may wonder what the heck a fulling mill is. A fulling mill is something that is part of the process of making woolen cloth. Remember, but it's the 1700s, and the Industrial Revolution really hasn't landed yet, right? So this is the manual way to make woolen clothing, which involves large barrels and people stomping in barrels filled with wool and urine. The process of fulling is to drive out the oils from the wool to turn it more into cloth, because when it comes off the animal, it's covered in lanolin and a bunch of other impurities. And so you strip it out. And by the way, this has been going on for thousands of years. So you're talking about the most mature version of fulling, which was these large plants. And they had more mechanization and so forth. But shortly after that, it would evolve sharply. But some of the first whiskey was made in a fulling mill, likely that Craig had built because it had much of similar equipment. It had mechanisms for heating and for cooling and so forth. There's lots of whiskey makers in that area at that time. The water was very soft, coming through limestone, and was ideal for it. Was Elijah the first? Probably not, but he was certainly in there. There is another apocryphal story associated with Elijah Craig, that he was responsible for charred barrels. That today, every American bourbon is made from American oak that has been toasted. There's varying levels of charge depending on the whiskey. And so that apparently Craig, as farmer, we don't know that he was a farmer, had a fire. And the barrels were burned, but not burned up, and he didn't want to waste them. So he filled them with whiskey anyway and shipped them out. And they found that they liked the flavor better. Now, charring barrels is also not an unusual technique. It had gone on for thousands of years as well. It was big in sailing to keep water fresh. That if you put water into raw barrels, it tends to get funky because the bacteria interact. So you char the inside of the barrel first, and that makes it far more sterile, as well as, generally speaking, the charcoal takes away bad flavors. Now, you just add a flavor to the water will turn tea colored, as it literally is extracting tannins from the woods as well. We've learned now through modern science that one of the things that happens when you char the inside of a barrel is you're breaking down longer lignite chains into shorter chains that are actually smell good and are flavorful, right? That's where a fair number of polyphenols and things come from, is that charring effect. A sense of sweetness, although it's not really sugar, it's something else. But and the point being, like, if Elijah Craig was in the whiskey making business in the 1780s, where's his whiskey? Because I got one here.
Yep.
Well, the name Elijah Craig does not appear on a bottle of whiskey until 1986.
Oh.
So, dun. So in the 1960s, so 200 years or so later, the Elijah Craig trademark was taken out by a group called Commonwealth Distillers, although these guys own the T.W. Samuels brand and a few others, but they never did anything with it. When Heaven Hills acquired the brand in 76, they sat on it for quite a while as well. But when they finally were releasing a premium whiskey, they decided to dust off that brand, and that came in 1986. So, I mean, Heaven Hills is not one of the old distilleries. They very much started up in the 1930s after Prohibition. It was the old Heaven Hill Springs distillery. It's one of the few that are still family owned. The Suntories and so forth, the world have not grabbed them. It's still the same family since it was started. They're known for having some of the largest barreling facilities, storage facilities in the world, over 1 million barrels in store in Heaven Hills. They also have been a big business. They have rounded up a lot of brands. So when you hear Evan Williams, it's actually made by Heaven Hills. So is Larceny, Old Fitzgerald, Parker Heritage, Pikesville, Rittenhouse. Those are all Heaven Hills brand. And of course, Elijah Craig. And they also make rums and tequilas and a whole lot of other stuff we don't talk about on a whiskey show. So we'll move on from that. In the 80s, which was a bad time for whiskey, coming out of the 70s, the main thing had been to reduce the price of whiskey because people were drinking highballs because the booze was cheaper. And so they made cheaper whiskey until it was not good whiskey. And in the 80s, the Heaven Hills folks realized, hey,
drinking Harvey Wall bangers instead.
Yeah, let's go the other way. Let's make a premium product. And that's when the Elijah brand came out. And that the first edition was originally called the Small Batch 12. So it was a 12-year-old whiskey, very unusual for the time. Made in relatively small batches because they didn't know if it was going to sell that well. And it sold so well, they ran out of 12. So they dropped the 12 from the name because now they were using 8 and blending it to make small batch, and you don't want to say 8 on the barrel at all. And then they got, it got fancy with it. As whiskeys became more popular in the 2010s, they started making barrel proof editions. So a few times a year, they release individual barrels of Elijah Craig at barrel strength, and you could get them. And this is one of the ones you could custom order, like if a company wanted a barrel, that kind of thing. They also did old editions, 18s,
so
20s, 23s.
Our favorite restaurant does this. They buy barrels.
Yeah, it's a way to make a premium product. You can buy them from Maker's Mark too. There's a few that do that. But the killer about Elijah Craig,
buy a barrel of whiskey?
Absolutely. We could totally do a TWiT barrel.
You'd have to really like the whiskey.
Well, here's
How many
Friday, I
bottles
have
in
a
a
couple of
barrel?
Elijah Craig Manhattans. This is a thing.
Yeah.
typically a typical a barrel, if we go for a proper aging, it's going to be between 200 and 300 bottles. So, I mean, the way you do this is we offer it up to the club, and then we go pick a barrel.
Oh.
We wait for it to age, and then we have it bottled with a custom label, and everybody gets one.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah, it might be fun.
How long would we have to let it age?
Well, it depends on the whiskey we pick and what age. We're going to go. The whole point of doing this, Leo, is then we have to make a trek to the distillery to sample some barrels and pick one.
I believe you have to do it in person.
That's the way it goes.
I love this idea. Yeah. I know people would want the Richard Campbell barrel,
There you go. Pick that whiskey. But to close this piece out, what's the most important part about this whiskey? What's great about it?
What? It's not expensive.
$40.
Oh, yeah. It's the best. It's the best bourbon whiskey I've ever had at that price.
Yeah.
I was all prepared to spend hundreds.
Yeah. And you do not need,
No.
I mean, if you want to, you can. Go find yourself an Elijah 20. Hard to find. And you'll spend a bundle. But pound for pound, one of the nicest whiskeys you're ever going to drink for $40.
As a notorious cheapskate, I could not agree more.
Yeah. It's great. It's one of those things where it was a gift at Christmas. And I'm like, I haven't had one of these in ages. And I took a taste of it, went, oh, yeah. And pulled out the decanter and keep it by me. This is mine.
It's you could find cheaper whiskeys, but they're not as good.
Yeah.
And then this one kind of punches above its price.
Most whiskeys of this quality, of this flavor profile, cost more than this. So it really is.
I'm going to try
when you look at other $40 whiskeys, and none of them are bad. Remember, I'm firmly in the camp of the best kind of whiskey is the one I have in my hand.
Yep.
What you like, but it was
a good one to have in your
easy
hand.
to decide what am I going to write about after tasting this. I'm like, well, boy, I'm gonna write that. And supporting Ray there, bottle of Evan Williams, a Rittenhouse. Those are all good whiskeys. You'll enjoy them too. But the original, I mean, that's what's cool about this Elijah Craig, right? That's from the 80s. No, it's not an ancient brand, but it's delicious.
I already know the answer to this question, but I was recently introduced to something I believe is pronounced Cynar. It's like CENAR. It's an artichoke base liqueur.
Oh my goodness.
It is fantastic for drinks that like you might use vermouth in otherwise, or an Aperol maybe, or
so sweet.
So it's kind of like a nice, no, that's the thing. It's like, I'm looking for things that don't have sugar, right? So it's kind of I'll do a little cocktail thing later at some point. CYNAR, I guess.
Liqueurs normally have sugars in them.
Well, on the lower end. I mean, like a lower end. Kind of.
Yeah. When I really want to get away from sugar, I drink whiskey.
Well, yeah, there's a nice Cynar kind of Manhattan to be had.
I honestly think that the alcohol does turn to sugar in your body, but maybe I'm wrong.
It has consequences. I have been taking notes for a while about talking about the origin of cocktails and so forth. I've just been a little wimpy to finish it. But
we love it.
I finish the .NET book first.
Yeah, .NET first, and then you can have your Cynar or whatever the hell weird stuff that Paul wants to pour down your throat. Elijah
Is it avocado or artichoke? No, it's artichoke.
It's artichoke.
Artichoke.
They should.
Oh, interesting.
They should put a little. They could use an artichoke garnish. Kind of scrape the meat off of the leaf there when you drink the cocktail. It'd be great.
Okay, let's not go crazy. I'll wait till
it's not for everybody.
Stephanie
I'll admit
comes
that.
out
I'm just
with
saying.
It's an Italian bitter aperitif of the Amaro variety, made from 13 herbs and plants.
Right.
It's very Amaro.
Predominant among which is the artichoke, and the reason the name, because the artichoke is Cynarla scolamus, which the drink derives its name. Cynar is dark brown, has a bittersweet flavor, 16.5 ABV, launched in Italy in 1952. So Gina Lollobrigida loved it.
Mm-hmm.
Low sugar, low alcohol, meant to stimulate appetite.
Yeah. Appetite for alcohol, am I right?
Because I struggle with that.
Yeah. I'd never heard about this until about, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
you go down the Amaro path, there are many side streets. Many.
They
Yep.
sure are. Holy cow.
It's like the mole of aperitifs. No, of
It is like mole, isn't it?
alcohols, or-
Yeah.
There's so many, and there's
Yeah.
So many.
Yeah.
Oh.
All you can do is try. You know,
It's a good
you
ride.
can never really master it, but
There is no try. There's only do.